The distant sound of gunfire rattled across the plains as Willow Winters watched her entire life crumble before her eyes. It was 1876 in Redemption Creek, a small but growing settlement in the Arizona Territory, and the town council had gathered on the steps of the newly built courthouse to declare their verdict. Accused of theft, witchcraft, and other invented transgressions, Willow stood with her chin held high despite the tears threatening to spill onto her dirt-smudged cheeks. At 22, she had already weathered more hardship than most, but this being cast out from the only community she had known since her parents' death felt like a final, crushing blow. "Begone by sundown," Mayor Hollister bellowed, his jowls quivering with self-righteous indignation. "Any who offer aid to this woman will face similar judgment." From the edge of the gathered crowd, Ryker Dawson observed the scene with barely contained fury. His weathered Stetson cast a shadow over piercing blue eyes that had seen their share of injustice in 30 years of life on the frontier. Leaning against the hitching post, he stroked his mustache thoughtfully while his free hand rested near the Colt revolver at his hip. Ryker had arrived in Redemption Creek only 3 months prior, having drifted northward after years working cattle drives up from Texas. But he had seen enough to know that Willow Winters was no thief, much less a witch. The crowd began to disperse, some muttering in agreement with the council's decision, others averting their eyes in shame at their collective cowardice. Willow stood alone now, clutching a small bundle of possessions, all she had been permitted to take. Ryker straightened up, adjusted his hat, and made his decision. He untied his chestnut stallion from the post and mounted in one fluid motion born of years in the saddle. With a gentle nudge of his spurs, he guided the horse through the thinning crowd and approached Willow as she started her solitary walk toward the edge of town. Drawing alongside her, Ryker slowed his horse to match her pace. The townsfolk who remained watched with wide eyes as the taciturn cowboy who rarely involved himself in town matters made his stand. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent street. "She belongs with me." Willow looked up, surprise momentarily replacing the despair in her hazel eyes. She had exchanged few words with the quiet cowboy during his time in town, knowing him only as a skilled horseman who occasionally took work at the livery stable. "Mr. Dawson, you'll find yourself unwelcome here too if you aid her," warned Councilman Porter, stepping forward with his hand on his own pistol. Ryker's gaze never left Willow's face. "Then I reckon it's time I moved on anyway." He extended his hand toward her. "What do you say, Miss Winters?" "My homestead's a day's ride north. Not much to look at, but there's shelter and safety there." Willow hesitated, weighing her dire circumstances against the risk of trusting this virtual stranger. But something in his steady gaze spoke of honesty and determination that had become rare commodities in Redemption Creek. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I've seen what passes for justice in this town," he replied simply, "and I don't cotton to it." After a moment's consideration, Willow placed her small hand in his calloused one and allowed him to help her onto the horse behind him. As they rode away from Redemption Creek, the murmurs of the townspeople faded behind them, replaced by the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the whisper of the wind through the sage. They rode in silence for several miles, putting distance between themselves and the town. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Willow was grateful for the occasional shade offered by scattered cottonwoods along the creek bed. Her arms encircled Ryker's waist tentatively, maintaining a respectful distance despite their physical proximity. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice carrying over the wind. "But you shouldn't have done that. You've ruined yourself in town on my account." Ryker adjusted his hat slightly. Wasn't much keeping me there anyway. Got my land grant papers last month, 160 acres up by Cottonwood Canyon. Been fixing to move out there full-time soon as I finish the cabin. And now you're taking in a stranger accused of witchcraft, Willow said with a bitter laugh. Surely not what you planned. Ryker reined in his horse at a bend in the creek, allowing the animal to drink. He dismounted and offered Willow a hand down, then reached for his canteen. Those accusations were horsewash, and any fool with eyes could see it, he said, offering her water. Hollister and his cronies wanted your land since your pa died, simple as that. Found an easy way to take it with no one to stand for you. Willow drank gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. How did you know about my father's land? Town ain't that big. Folk talk. Ryker shrugged, scanning the horizon habitually. Your pa's claim borders what's now my northern line. Good water access, fertile soil in the valley. Hollister's been buying up everything he can since the railroad survey came through last spring. Understanding dawned on Willow's face. The railroad's coming through Redemption Creek. Not officially announced yet, but Hollister's brother-in-law works for the Pacific Railway. Information has a way of traveling faster than trains. Ryker took back the canteen and secured it to his saddle. Your 40 acres might not seem like much, but it's positioned right where they'd likely want to build a depot. Willow's shoulders slumped. It doesn't matter now, they've taken it. Maybe, maybe not. Ryker helped her back onto the horse. Law's still the law, even out here, you've got papers. My father's deed is with my things at the house. They wouldn't let me retrieve much before they escorted me out. Then we might have a fighting chance, Ryker said, mounting up behind her and taking the reins. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. They continued riding as the afternoon stretched on, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to rolling hills dotted with pine and juniper. Willow's fatigue became evident as she leaned back against Ryker's chest, her body relaxing despite her best efforts to maintain proper distance. Not much further, he assured her as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Just over that ridge, as they crested the hill, Willow gasped softly. Below them stretched a small valley, verdant and sheltered, with a clear stream running through it. Near a stand of cottonwoods stood a modest but solidly built cabin with a small corral and barn alongside it. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. Someone's there, Willow said, tensing immediately. That'll be Virgil, Ryker explained, guiding the horse down the slope. My ranch hand. Good man, fought for the Union, doesn't talk much about it. Been helping me build the place while I finished up work in town. As they approached, an older man with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the barn, rifle at the ready until he recognized Ryker. He raised a hand in greeting, then paused when he noticed Willow. This is unexpected, Virgil said as they dismounted in front of the cabin. His weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts as he nodded politely to Willow. Madam. Virgil, this is Miss Willow Winters, Ryker said, taking the reins of his horse. She'll be staying with us for a spell. Hollister and his council ran her out of town today. Understanding flickered in Virgil's eyes. He nodded again, this time with more warmth. Figured something like that might happen eventually. Town's been changing and not for the better. He extended a hand to Willow. Welcome to our humble establishment, Miss Winters. It ain't much, but you're safe here. Thank you, Willow replied, shaking his hand. She swayed slightly on her feet, the emotional and physical toll of the day finally catching up with her. Ryker noticed immediately. Virgil, can you see to thunder? Miss Winters needs rest and food. Of course. Virgil took the horse's reins. Stews on the fire inside. Made enough for an army as usual. Ryker guided Willow toward the cabin, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching her. The interior was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, wooden table and chairs, and a few shelves holding books and supplies. 2 doors led off to what Willow presumed were bedrooms. "You can have my room," Ryker said, gesturing to one of the doors. "I'll bunk with Virgil or take the main room." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and will," he interrupted gently. "It's just a bed, Miss Winters. Nothing fancy, but clean and dry." Willow wanted to protest further but found she lacked the energy. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Ryker," he corrected. "And there's nothing to repay. Now sit and eat something before you fall over." The stew was hearty and flavorful, filled with venison, potatoes, and wild onions. Willow hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful hit her tongue. She ate silently, listening as Ryker filled Virgil in on the events in town. "So they finally did it," Virgil mused, stroking his beard. "Been looking for an excuse to run her off that land since Walter Winters passed." "They called me a witch," Willow said quietly, setting down her spoon, "because I use herbs for healing. My mother taught me before she died of the fever. Said I must be practicing dark arts when Mrs. Porter's baby came early and didn't survive, even though I tried everything I knew to save them both." Ryker's jaw tightened. "Convenient timing with the railroad survey complete. You truly believe we can fight this?" Willow asked, doubt evident in her voice. "Hollister has the town council, the sheriff, and most of the townspeople behind him." "Not all of them," Ryker replied. "And we don't need the town on our side. The territorial court in Prescott has final say on land disputes. With your father's deed and some witness testimony, we stand a chance." "Witness testimony? Who would speak against Hollister?" "Doc Sullivan, for one," Virgil suggested. "He never did hold with the way they treated you after your healing work with his wife's rheumatism last winter." "And Jacob at the general store," added Ryker. "He knows you didn't steal that bolt of calico they accused you of taking." Willow's eyes welled with tears. "You seem to know a great deal about my troubles, for someone who's barely spoken 10 words to me before today." Ryker shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I pay attention, and injustice has a way of sticking in my craw." After supper, Virgil excused himself to finish evening chores, leaving Ryker and Willow alone by the fire. The silence between them felt less strained now, but questions hung in the air like the smoke from the hearth. "Why did you really help me today?" Willow finally asked, turning to face him fully. "The truth, please, not just talk of justice and neighborly duty." Ryker stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "My mother was run out of a town in Kansas when I was 10. Accused of similar nonsense because she was a midwife who knew her herbs and spoke her mind. No one stood for her." His voice grew quiet. "She didn't survive the winter that followed." Willow's hand moved involuntarily to cover his where it rested on the table. "I'm so sorry." He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without looking up. "Get some rest, Miss Winters. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how to get your land back." "Willow," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Ryker, then you must call me Willow." For the first time that day, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Willow it is, then. Good night." That night, lying in Ryker's bed with its clean, rough sponge sheets that smelled faintly of pine and leather, Willow stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the dramatic turn her life had taken. From condemned outcast to being under the protection of a man she barely knew in the span of a single day. As exhaustion finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, her banishment might prove a blessing in disguise. Dawn arrived with the chattering of birds and the distant lowing of cattle. Willow woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in the same clothes, smoothing the wrinkles as best she could and pinning her honey-brown hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged into the main room, she found Virgil alone, frying salt pork and potatoes over the fire. "Morning, Miss Winters," he greeted her. "Sleep well, better than I expected to, thank you," she replied, looking around. "Where's Ryker?" "Out checking the fence line on the north pasture, said to tell you he'd be back midday." Virgil slid a plate of food toward her. "Hope you're hungry." As they ate, Virgil proved more talkative than he'd been the previous evening, sharing stories of his time with Ryker. They had met 2 years earlier in Tucson, when Virgil was down on his luck after being cheated out of his own homestead claim. Ryker had offered him work and eventually partnership in the new venture. "He's a good man," Virgil concluded. "Doesn't show it in the usual ways, mind you, not one for speeches or grand gestures. But when it matters, there's none better to have at your back." "I'm beginning to see that," Willow acknowledged. She hesitated, then added, "He told me about his mother. Is that why he's so determined to help me fight for my land?" Virgil nodded slowly. "That's part of it, surely, but there's more." He gave her a knowing look. "I've seen the way he watches you in town when you don't notice. Way a man looks at something precious he doesn't believe he has any right to approach." Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Surely you're mistaken. He hardly knows me." "Knowing and understanding are different things," Virgil said cryptically, rising from the table. "Now, if you're of a mind to help out while you're here, I could use a hand with the garden. Those beans won't pick themselves." Grateful for the change of subject and the opportunity to be useful, Willow followed Virgil outside. The morning passed quickly as they worked side by side in the thriving vegetable garden. Willow found herself impressed by the careful planning evident in the neat rows and companion planting. Someone here knew their way around growing things. "This is Ryker's doing?" she asked as they harvested green beans and summer squash. "Mostly mine," Virgil admitted, "but he's a quick learner. Man knows livestock better than any I've met, but plants were new to him when we started. Now he can tell when a tomato needs more water just by looking at its leaves." By midday, they had preserved several jars of beans for winter and prepared a hearty vegetable stew for the afternoon meal. Willow was washing up at the pump when the sound of hoofbeats announced Ryker's return. He dismounted smoothly, leading not only his chestnut stallion but also a pretty dappled mare. Willow dried her hands on her apron and walked over, curious. "Afternoon," Ryker greeted her, his eyes quickly taking in her flushed cheeks and the smudge of dirt on her forehead. "I see Virgil put you to work already." "I insisted," she replied. "I won't be a burden while I'm here." "Never thought you would be," he gestured to the mare. "This is Penny. Thought you might need a horse of your own while you're here. She's gentle but sure-footed." Willow stared at him in surprise. "Where did you get her?" "Belonged to the widow Jenkins over in Silver Springs. She's moving east to live with her daughter, selling off what she can't take." "Got her for a fair price." "I can't accept such a gift," Willow protested. "It's far too much." Ryker's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened. "Not a gift, just practical. Can't have you stranded here if there's need to ride out. Besides, we'll need to visit Prescott soon to file your claim dispute. It's a 3-day journey." Before Willow could respond, Virgil emerged from the cabin. "Stew's ready," he announced, "and I believe we have company coming." He nodded toward the southern ridge, where a cloud of dust indicated an approaching rider. Ryker's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm as they watched the lone horseman approach. As the figure drew closer, Willow gasped in recognition. "It's Doc Sullivan," she exclaimed. "From Redemption Creek." The elderly doctor reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "Miss Winters, thank the Lord I found you. I've been searching since I heard what happened yesterday." Ryker stepped forward. "You're welcome here, Doc, but I hope you weren't followed." "Took precautions," the doctor assured him, dismounting stiffly. "Hollister's men are watching the roads, but I know these hills better than they do. Been riding them for 40 years. Over the simple but hearty meal, Doc Sullivan shared the news from town. After Ryker and Willow's departure, sentiment had begun to divide. While Hollister maintained control of the council, whispers of discontent were growing, particularly after the mayor had immediately filed paperwork claiming Willow's abandoned property. "Too eager by half," Doc said, shaking his head. "Made some folks wonder what the rush was about. Then this morning, Jacob from the store started asking publicly why no one had seen the so-called stolen goods Miss Winters was accused of taking." "Is Jacob in trouble?" Willow asked worriedly. "Not yet. He's too well respected and Hollister needs his store, but he's walking a fine line." The doctor reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather portfolio. "The real reason I came, though, was to bring you these." He handed the portfolio to Willow. Inside were her father's land deed, some personal letters, and a small daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. "How did you get these?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes as she traced her mother's face in the photograph. "Jacob retrieved them from your house before Hollister's men could go through everything. Asked me to bring them to you if I found you." He looked at Ryker appraisingly. "Town's saying you claimed Miss Winters belongs with you. That true?" Ryker met the older man's gaze steadily. "Said what I needed to say to get her out of there safely. She's her own woman, free to go where she chooses when this is settled." Doc nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "Well, I should get back before I'm missed. But I wanted you to know you have friends still in Redemption Creek, Miss Winters. When you're ready to fight for your land, you won't be doing it alone." After the doctor departed, Willow sat on the porch steps, carefully examining each document from the portfolio. Ryker joined her after a while, settling beside her with a respectful distance between them. "My father filed his claim in '63, during the war," she said softly. "Came west for my mother's health. Her lungs were weak. The dry air helped her live almost 10 years longer than the doctors in Philadelphia predicted." "Your father built that house himself?" Ryker asked. Willow nodded. "Every board. He was a carpenter by trade, taught himself ranching and farming as he went." She smiled at the memory. "Made plenty of mistakes that first year, but he was determined to create something lasting." "And he did," Ryker said. "That's good land, well tended. I've tried to maintain it since he passed 3 years ago." Willow sighed. "It hasn't been easy alone, but it's home. The only one I've known since I was 12. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of gold and crimson. The peacefulness of the moment felt surreal after the tumult of the previous day. "We'll ride for Prescott in 2 days, Ryker finally said. "Give you time to rest and prepare. Virgil will stay here to mind the place." "And if we fail?" Willow asked quietly. "If the territorial court sides with Hollister?" Ryker turned to look at her, his gaze unwavering. "Then you'll always have a place here if you want it, for as long as you need." The sincerity in his voice caught Willow off guard. This man who had risked his standing in the community for her, a virtual stranger, continued to show a depth of character that both confused and attracted her. In the fading light, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the strength in his profile, and something deeper in his expression that made her heart beat a little faster. "Thank you," she whispered, and for once, the words didn't feel inadequate. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation for their journey. Willow insisted on contributing, spending the morning baking travel bread and jerking meat for the trail. In the afternoon, Ryker took her riding on Penny to ensure she was comfortable with the mare before their long journey. "You ride well," he observed as they cantered across a meadow bursting with late summer wildflowers. "My father insisted I learn," Willow replied, expertly guiding Penny around a fallen log. "Said a woman on the frontier needed to handle a horse as well as any man." Wise man. They rode to the northern boundary of Ryker's property, where a clear stream marked the dividing line between his land and what had been the Winters' homestead. "Just over that rise is your place," Ryker said, gesturing toward a gentle hill covered in ponderosa pines. "About 3 miles to your cabin from here." Willow gazed longingly in that direction. "It feels strange, being so close yet unable to go home." "Soon," Ryker promised, "one way or another." As they turned back toward the cabin, a sudden cloudburst sent them galloping for shelter beneath a massive old oak. The summer rain fell in heavy sheets, creating a curtain of water around their refuge. Their horses nickered and shook their manes, spattering additional droplets. Willow laughed, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "Well, at least the garden will be happy." Ryker smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually solemn features. "Virgil will be out there dancing in it, most likely. Man loves his vegetables more than his natural." Their laughter mingled with the sound of rainfall, creating a moment of unexpected intimacy. When it subsided, Willow found Ryker watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking it's good to hear you laugh," he replied simply. "Suits you." The rain slackened, and they continued homeward at a more leisurely pace, the shared moment having shifted something subtle between them. That evening, as they finalized preparations for their journey, Willow found herself watching Ryker when he wasn't looking, noticing the careful precision of his movements, the quiet competence in everything he did. Virgil caught her eye once and gave her a knowing wink that made her blush furiously, and redouble her attention to the map they were studying. They departed at first light the following morning, the eastern sky still streaked with pink and lavender as they bid farewell to Virgil. The old ranch hand pressed a small package into Willow's hands. "Medicinal herbs," he explained. "Noticed you eyeing my garden patch yesterday. Thought they might come in useful." Touched by the thoughtful gesture, Willow thanked him warmly. The first day's ride was uneventful, taking them through rolling grasslands and scattered woodland. Ryker set a steady pace that wouldn't overtax the horses, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing snippets of information about the territory. Though still reserved, he seemed more at ease in the open country, away from the constraints of town life. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow beside a small tributary. While Ryker tended the horses, Willow gathered firewood and prepared a simple meal from their provisions. Working together without need for many words, they established their camp with efficient coordination that felt surprisingly natural. After supper, they sat by the fire, the night sounds of the wilderness creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. Ryker told her about his years driving cattle, the characters he'd met on the trail, and his decision to settle in the Arizona territory after seeing its beauty during a particularly difficult drive. "What about family?" Willow asked. "Besides your mother, I mean. Father died at Shiloh." "I was 15. Had a younger sister, Emma, lost her to the same winter that took my mother." His voice remained even, but Willow could sense the old pain beneath the words. "Been on my own since then, more or less." "I'm sorry," Willow said softly. "It's not easy being the one left behind." Ryker nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words and the understanding behind them. "Your turn," he said. "Tell me something I don't know about Willow Winters. She smiled, warming to the unexpected invitation. Let's see. I can play the piano, though I haven't had access to one in years. My mother taught me. She brought her music books west with us, probably the most impractical thing to transport, but my father never complained. What did you play? Mostly hymns and folk songs. Some classical pieces too. Mozart was my favorite. Her eyes grew distant with memory. I miss it sometimes. The way the notes would fill our little cabin, making it seem bigger somehow. There's a piano at the church in Prescott, Ryker said. Perhaps you'll have a chance to play while we're there. Perhaps. Willow hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. Ryker, what will you do if we succeed? If I get my land back? He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkness. Continue building my place, I suppose. It's good having neighbors you can trust out here. We would be neighbors, she mused, testing the word and finding it simultaneously accurate and insufficient for what was developing between them. Ryker looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. Is that what you want? To go back to living alone on your homestead? The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken implications. Willow considered her answer carefully. I want my home back because it represents everything my parents worked for, she finally said. But these past few days have shown me that perhaps there are different kinds of homes to be made. She offered him a small smile. I'm not sure I have all the answers yet. He nodded, seeming to understand the complexity behind her response. Fair enough. No need to decide everything tonight. They fell silent, each lost in private thoughts as the fire burned lower. When Willow finally retreated to her bedroll, she felt Ryker's eyes follow her, and the awareness sent a pleasant shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. The next 2 days of travel brought them through increasingly varied terrain, rocky foothills giving way to higher elevations, dotted with pine forests and occasional meadows. They encountered few other travelers, though twice they passed freight wagons headed toward Prescott, the territorial capital. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a hill and saw Prescott spread out before them in the valley below. The town was considerably larger than Redemption Creek, with several streets of businesses, a courthouse, and numerous residences sprawling outward from the central plaza. Impressive, isn't it? Ryker remarked as they paused to rest the horses. Territorial capital since '64. They say it might become the state capital too once Arizona achieves statehood. Willow nodded, taking in the sight. After the isolation of the trail, the bustling settlement seemed almost overwhelming. Where will we stay? There's a decent boarding house on Montezuma Street. Clean, respectable. He glanced at her trail-dusty appearance and smiled slightly. They have actual bathtubs too. Now that sounds like heaven, Willow admitted with a laugh. I must look a fright after 3 days on the trail. You look. Ryker paused, seeming to search for the right words. Like you belong out here, free. The simple observation touched Willow more deeply than elaborate flattery might have. Thank you, she said softly. They rode into town as the afternoon shadows lengthened, attracting curious glances from locals unaccustomed to seeing a woman in riding clothes accompanying a weather-beaten cowboy. Ryker led them directly to the boarding house, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and window boxes filled with late-blooming flowers. The proprietress, a plump, gray-haired woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Harding, greeted them with friendly efficiency. 2 rooms, you say? For how long? At least 3 nights, Ryker replied. Possibly longer, depending on court business. Mrs. Harding's eyebrows rose slightly at this, but she asked no questions as she recorded their names in her ledger. Suppers at 6 sharp, breakfast from 7 to 8. No gentlemen callers in ladies' rooms, no liquor on the premises, and no smoking indoors. She handed them each a key. "Miss Winters, you're in number 4 upstairs. Mr. Dawson, you're in number 7 at the end of the hall." After settling their horses at the nearby livery, they returned to the boarding house to clean up before supper. Willow luxuriated in the promised bath, washing away the dust and fatigue of the journey. She changed into the one clean dress. She had packed a simple blue calico that had seen better days but was still presentable. When she descended to the dining room, she found Ryker already seated at a small table by the window. He stood as she approached, and she was momentarily taken aback by his transformed appearance. He had shaved his trail stubble, revealing a strong jawline that complemented his high cheekbones. His dark hair, still damp from washing, was neatly combed, and he wore a clean white shirt with his usual dark trousers. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Dawson," she remarked with a smile as she took her seat. "As do you, Miss Winters," he replied, his eyes appreciating the way the blue fabric brought out the golden highlights in her hair. Supper was a simple but satisfying affair of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. They discussed their plans for the following day, when they would visit the Territorial Land Office to file Willow's formal complaint and request a hearing with the circuit judge. "Judge Harmon has a reputation for fairness," Ryker told her, "but he's a stickler for procedure and documentation. We'll need to present your case precisely." "Do you think Doc Sullivan's testimony will help?" Willow asked, breaking off a piece of bread. "It would, but I doubt he can leave Redemption Creek long enough to appear in court here. We'll need to gather written statements from him and anyone else willing to speak on your behalf." Ryker took a sip of coffee. "The deed will be our strongest evidence, particularly if we can prove Hollister knew about the railroad before making his move." After dinner, they retired to the parlor where several other guests were gathered. An older gentleman was playing chess with a young man who appeared to be his son, while 2 women worked on embroidery near the hearth. In the corner stood the piano Ryker had mentioned, a modest upright that had seen better days but appeared well maintained. Catching the direction of Willow's gaze, Ryker nodded encouragingly. "Why not try it? Mrs. Harding mentioned earlier that guests are welcome to play." After a moment's hesitation, Willow approached the instrument, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. Then, taking a deep breath, she sat on the bench and began to play a gentle rendition of "Beautiful Dreamer." The sweet, familiar melody filled the parlor, drawing appreciative glances from the other guests. As the final notes faded, soft applause broke out. Emboldened, Willow continued with several more pieces: a Bach minuet, a simplified Mozart sonata, and finally, a folk tune her mother had loved. When she finally rose from the piano, she found Ryker watching her with an expression of undisguised admiration. "That was beautiful," he said quietly as she rejoined him. "You play with real feeling." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. It felt wonderful to play again after so long. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the conversations around them and enjoying the simple pleasure of being clean, well-fed, and safe after their journey. When Willow finally excused herself to retire for the night, Ryker walked her to the base of the stairs. "Sleep well," he said. "Tomorrow will be a full day." "You too," she replied. For a moment, she thought he might take her hand or make some other gesture, but he simply nodded and stepped back, allowing her to ascend the stairs alone. In her room, Willow stood by the window, looking out at the lamplit streets of Prescott. So much had changed in such a short time. Less than a week ago, she had been living alone on her homestead, managing as best she could and enduring the growing hostility from Hollister and his allies. Now, she was in Prescott with a man who had upended his own life to help her fight for justice. and somewhere along the dusty trail between Redemption Creek and Prescott, she had begun to feel something for Ryker Dawson that went beyond gratitude, something that both excited and frightened her with its intensity and newness. As she prepared for bed, Willow wondered if Ryker felt it too, this growing connection between them. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that suggested he did, but his reserved nature made it difficult to be certain. Perhaps tomorrow would bring more clarity, along with their first steps toward reclaiming her land. Morning brought a clear sky and renewed determination. After breakfast, Ryker and Willow made their way to the Territorial Land Office, a sturdy brick building adjacent to the courthouse. Inside, they were directed to a clerk who examined Willow's deed with professional interest. "This appears to be in order," the young man said, adjusting his spectacles. "Filed properly in '63, all taxes paid through last quarter. What seems to be the problem, Miss Winters?" Willow explained the situation, the accusations against her, her forced removal from the property, and Mayor Hollister's immediate claim on her land. The clerk listened attentively, making occasional notes. "Unfortunately, Mr. Hollister has already filed paperwork claiming the property was abandoned," he said when she finished. "He's citing Territorial Statute 47B, which allows for reclamation of abandoned homesteads after 30 days. It's been less than a week," Ryker pointed out. "And she didn't abandon it, she was forced out under false pretenses." The clerk nodded. "That's why you'll need to request a hearing with Judge Harmon. He can issue an injunction preventing any transfer of ownership until the matter is resolved." He slid a form across the desk. "Fill this out, and I'll make sure it reaches the judge's clerk today." As Willow completed the paperwork, the clerk continued speaking with Ryker. "You should know that Mayor Hollister has influential connections here in Prescott. His brother-in-law works for the Pacific Railway, and they've been buying up land all through the territory." "We're aware," Ryker replied grimly. "That's part of our concern, that this is related to the railroad's plans for Redemption Creek." The clerk lowered his voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but the survey team has indeed recommended a depot near Redemption Creek. The official announcement won't come for another month or so, but certain parties have been positioning themselves accordingly." "Parties like Hollister," Willow said, looking up from her writing. "Exactly." The clerk accepted the completed form from her. "Judge Harmon is hearing cases tomorrow and Thursday. With luck, he'll see you before week's end." Outside the land office, Ryker and Willow paused to consider their next steps. "We should visit the newspaper office," Ryker suggested. "The Prescott Courier might have information about the railroad plans that could help our case." The newspaper editor, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Alina Burke, received them with professional courtesy that warmed considerably when she learned the nature of their visit. "Hollister and his ilk have been pulling these tactics all across the territory," she said indignantly, shuffling through a stack of back issues. "Here, 3 similar cases in the past year alone. Small landowners forced out on trumped-up charges, their properties snapped up by speculators with railroad connections. Were any of those landowners able to reclaim their property?" Willow asked anxiously. "One was," Mrs. Burke replied, handing them a newspaper from 4 months prior. "A rancher near Flagstaff. Judge Harmon ruled in his favor when evidence emerged that the town council had conspired to drive him off his land." "That's encouraging," Ryker said, scanning the article. "It establishes a precedent." Mrs. Burke studied them thoughtfully. "I'd like to write about your case, Miss Winters. People should know what's happening to honest homesteaders in the name of progress." After providing Mrs. Burke with the details of her situation, Willow and Ryker continued their fact-finding mission. visiting the office of a sympathetic lawyer recommended by the newspaper editor. The attorney, Mr. Abernathy, confirmed that they had grounds for a strong case, but cautioned them about the difficulties ahead. Hollister will have legal representation, likely someone retained by the railroad, he warned. They'll try to discredit you personally, Miss Winters. Those witchcraft accusations weren't just to scare the townspeople, they were laying groundwork for arguing that you're unfit to maintain your claim. That's outrageous, Ryker said, his voice tight with anger. But not unexpected, Mr. Abernathy replied calmly. I've seen these tactics before. The key will be establishing that these accusations arose only after the railroad survey and demonstrating your prior good standing in the community. By late afternoon, they had gathered considerable information and secured Mr. Abernathy's services for their hearing. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Willow felt simultaneously encouraged and overwhelmed. You think we truly have a chance? She asked Ryker as they passed the town square. I do, he replied with quiet confidence. The facts are on our side, and Judge Harmon has shown he won't be swayed by railroad interests alone. Willow nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. As they continued walking, she impulsively slipped her arm through his. Ryker glanced down at her in surprise but made no move to pull away. Instead, he adjusted his pace to match hers, and they walked in companionable silence back to their lodgings. That evening after supper, a message arrived from the courthouse. Judge Harmon would hear their case the following afternoon at 2 o'clock. The news brought both relief and anxiety. Tomorrow they would face the first real test in their fight to reclaim Willow's home. Unable to settle, Willow suggested a walk to calm her nerves. Ryker readily agreed, and they strolled through Prescott streets as twilight descended. The town was lively at this hour, with saloons doing brisk business and families enjoying the cooler evening air on their porches. They found themselves at the edge of town, where a small rise offered a view of the surrounding countryside. In the fading light, the landscape stretched out before them, rolling hills, pine forests, and the distant mountains painted in shades of purple and blue. It's beautiful, Willow said softly. It is, Ryker agreed, though when she glanced up, she found him looking not at the vista but at her. The realization sent warmth spreading through her chest. Acting on impulse, she reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. His palm was calloused but warm against hers, and after a moment's hesitation, he returned the gentle pressure. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, I want you to know how grateful I am, not just for your help with the land, but for believing in me when no one else did. Ryker turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. It's not just about belief, Willow. It's about what's right. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. And it's about what I've come to feel for you. Her heart quickened at his admission. What have you come to feel? More than I expected, he said quietly. More than I've felt for anyone in a very long time. In the gathering dusk, with the town lights beginning to twinkle below them, Willow felt a sense of rightness settle over her. She stepped closer to him, tilting her face upward. I feel it too, she whispered. Ryker's free hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb tracing a feather-light path along her jawline. Then, with exquisite tenderness, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that spoke of restrained passion and deepening affection. When they finally broke apart, Willow remained within the circle of his arms, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. They stood that way for several minutes, neither feeling the need to speak, simply absorbing the significance of the moment and the shift in their relationship it represented. Eventually, they walked back to the boarding house, hands still intertwined, each lost in private thoughts yet profoundly aware of the other. At the foot of the stairs, Ryker kissed her once more, a gentle good night that carried the promise of more to come. "Rest well," he said. "Tomorrow we fight." Willow nodded, reluctant to break the connection between them, but knowing they both needed clear heads for the hearing. "Good night, Ryker," she replied softly, before ascending the stairs to her room. That night, despite her anxiety about the hearing, Willow slept more peacefully than she had in weeks, comforted by the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Ryker by her side. The territorial courthouse was an imposing structure of red brick, with white columns flanking its entrance. Inside, the high-ceilinged courtroom smelled of polish and paper, with rows of wooden benches facing the judge's elevated desk. As 2 o'clock approached, the room began to fill with spectators, some drawn by genuine interest in the case, others merely seeking entertainment on a slow afternoon. Willow sat beside Ryker at the plaintiff's table, wearing her best dress, a dark green cotton with modest lace trim that she had purchased in Prescott the previous morning. She had pinned her hair in a neat chignon, wanting to present herself as the respectable homesteader she was, rather than the wild witch Hollister had portrayed her as. Mr. Abernathy joined them moments before the bailiff called the court to order, bringing several documents he had prepared overnight. "I've drafted statements based on our conversations," he explained in a low voice. "Judge Harmon will want specific evidence of the conspiracy against you." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harmon entered, a tall, lean man with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes. After the formalities of opening court, he peered down at them over his spectacles. "This is the matter of Winters versus Hollister, concerning property rights and alleged abandonment of homestead. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mr. Abernathy replied, rising to his feet. "And I see Mayor Hollister is represented by Mr. Whitaker," the judge continued, nodding toward a well-dressed gentleman at the opposing table. "Very well. Proceed with your opening statements." Mr. Abernathy presented Willow's case with elegant precision, outlining the circumstances of her removal from the property, the suspicious timing related to the railroad survey, and the presentation of false accusations designed to isolate her from community support. Mr. Whitaker countered with a portrayal of Hollister as a civic-minded leader concerned about dangerous elements in his growing town. He characterized Willow as unstable and possibly dangerous, citing the witchcraft rumors and suggesting her isolated lifestyle indicated an inability to properly maintain her claim. As Willow listened to these disparaging descriptions of herself, she felt Ryker tense beside her. Beneath the table, she placed her hand on his arm, silently urging restraint. They had anticipated this strategy, and getting angry would only play into their opponent's hands. Judge Harmon called Willow to testify first. Taking the oath with steady composure, she answered Mr. Abernathy's questions clearly and honestly, describing her life in Redemption Creek, her parents' establishment of the homestead, and the escalating harassment she had faced from Hollister and his allies after the railroad surveyors had visited the area. "And prior to these recent accusations, what was your standing in the community?" Mr. Abernathy asked. "I believe I was well regarded," Willow replied. "I've assisted Doc Sullivan with medical matters, preparing herbal remedies and helping with births and illnesses. I participate in community events, attend church regularly, and have always paid my taxes promptly." "When did the accusations of witchcraft begin?" "Approximately 2 weeks after the railroad survey team departed," Willow said. "Mayor Hollister began suggesting that my herbal remedies were unnatural, When Mrs. Porter's baby was stillborn despite my attempts to help, he publicly accused me of causing the death through dark arts. Mr. Whittaker's cross-examination was aggressive, designed to provoke an emotional response. He questioned Willow about her herbal knowledge, implying that her remedies had caused harm rather than healing. He brought up isolated incidents from years past, twisting them to portray her as confrontational and unstable. Throughout the ordeal, Willow maintained her composure, answering truthfully but calmly, refusing to be baited into angry responses. When Mr. Whittaker finally exhausted his questions, Judge Harmon called a brief recess. In the courthouse corridor, Ryker pulled Willow aside. "You were magnificent," he said quietly, his eyes filled with admiration. "Don't let him get to you. He's trying to make you look irrational." "I know," she replied, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly despite her outward calm. "It's just difficult hearing him twist everything into something sinister." When court resumed, Ryker took the stand. Under Mr. Abernathy's questioning, he described witnessing Willow's expulsion from town and his observations of Hollister's behavior before and after the railroad survey. He spoke with steady conviction, his usual reserve giving weight to his testimony. "And why did you intervene on Miss Winters' behalf?" Mr. Abernathy asked. "Because what was happening was wrong," Ryker replied simply. "I've seen enough injustice in my life to recognize it. Miss Winters is a decent, hard-working woman being driven from her rightful property by men with ulterior motives." Mr. Whittaker's cross-examination attempted to paint Ryker as an impulsive drifter with no standing in the community, perhaps even romantically involved with Willow, and therefore unreliable as a witness. "Is it not true, Mr. Dawson, that you publicly declared she belongs with me when you helped Miss Winters leave town?" Mr. Whittaker asked with a knowing smirk. "I did say those words," Ryker acknowledged calmly. "It was the quickest way to create an exit for someone being unjustly persecuted." "And do you maintain that your interest in this case is purely about justice, with no personal feelings involved?" Ryker met the lawyer's gaze steadily. "My interest began as a matter of justice. I won't deny that I've since developed respect and admiration for Miss Winters' character and determination. But that doesn't change the facts of what happened in Redemption Creek." The afternoon continued with testimony from Mr. Abernathy's final witness, a former railroad surveyor who confirmed that the proposed route would indeed run directly through Willow's property, making it highly valuable for development. As the shadows lengthened outside the courthouse windows, Judge Harmon called an end to the day's proceedings. "We will resume tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with Mayor Hollister's testimony and any additional witnesses. Court is adjourned." Outside the courthouse, Ryker, Willow, and Mr. Abernathy conferred briefly before parting ways. "You both did well today," the lawyer assured them. Judge Harmon was paying close attention to the timeline of events, which works in our favor. "Tomorrow will be challenging when Hollister takes the stand, but I believe we've established a strong foundation." After the lawyer departed, Ryker suggested dinner at a small restaurant near the boarding house rather than returning for Mrs. Harding's communal meal. "I think we could both use some quiet," he said, correctly reading Willow's exhaustion after the emotional day. The restaurant was cozy and relatively private, with well-spaced tables and subdued lighting. Over a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they discussed the day's events and strategized for the following morning. "You think the judge believed us?" Willow asked, crumbling a piece of bread absently. "I do," Ryker replied. "He seems fair-minded and the evidence is compelling. The question is whether it will be enough to counter Hollister's influence." Willow nodded, pushing her half-eaten meal aside. It's strange facing someone like Hollister in a formal setting. In town, he always seemed so powerful, almost untouchable. But in that courtroom today, he looked ordinary. Just a man, not some invincible force. That's the thing about bullies, Ryker said. Their power often comes from isolation, making their targets feel alone and helpless. You're not alone anymore, Willow. She reached across the table to take his hand, drawing comfort from his steady presence. No, I'm not, and neither are you. The simple truth of that statement hung between them, acknowledging the deeper connection that had developed during their shared ordeal. Whatever the outcome of the hearing, they had found something in each other that neither had expected, but both increasingly treasured. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, savoring the cool evening air and the simple pleasure of being together without the pressures of the courtroom hanging over them. At the foot of the stairs, Ryker kissed her goodnight with gentle reverence, his hands cradling her face as though she were something infinitely precious. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he whispered, "remember that you've already won something important, your freedom to choose your own path forward." Willow nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "And I've found someone to walk that path with me if he's willing." Ryker's smile was answer enough as he reluctantly released her. "Sleep well, Willow. Tomorrow we finish this fight." The second day of the hearing began with Mayor Hollister taking the stand. Dressed in an expensive suit that emphasized his prosperity, he presented himself as a concerned civic leader who had acted in the best interests of Redemption Creek. Under Mr. Whitaker's careful questioning, he depicted Willow as increasingly erratic following her father's death, suggesting that her isolation had led to disturbing behaviors. "The council was concerned for her welfare as well as the safety of our townspeople," Hollister claimed with practiced sincerity. "When multiple citizens reported unusual activities and expressed fear of her practices, we felt compelled to act." "And the claim that Miss Winters abandoned her property, can you elaborate on that?" Mr. Whitaker prompted. "She left town willingly with Mr. Dawson," Hollister replied smoothly. "Made no arrangements for the maintenance of her property, no indication of when or if she intended to return. As mayor, I have a responsibility to ensure that viable land within our township is properly utilized, especially as we anticipate growth with the coming railroad." Mr. Abernathy's cross-examination was methodical and relentless, focusing on the suspicious timing of the accusations and Hollister's immediate move to claim the property. "Mayor Hollister, can you name any specific incidents of Miss Winters' alleged witchcraft that occurred before the railroad survey team visited Redemption Creek?" he asked. Hollister shifted uncomfortably. "Well, she's been known for her unusual remedies for years. That's not what I asked," Mr. Abernathy interrupted politely but firmly. "I asked for specific accusations of witchcraft prior to the survey team's visit." "I don't recall the exact timing of when concerns were first raised," Hollister hedged. "Let me help refresh your memory," Mr. Abernathy said, producing a stack of documents. "These are the minutes from town council meetings dating back 3 years. There is not a single mention of concerns about Miss Winters' practices until the meeting of June 17th of this year, exactly 8 days after the railroad survey team departed." As the questioning continued, Hollister grew increasingly defensive, contradicting himself several times regarding the sequence of events and his knowledge of the railroad's plans. By the time Mr. Abernathy finished his cross-examination, the mayor's credibility had been significantly undermined. The next witness called by Mr. Whitaker was Councilman Porter, who reiterated many of Hollister's claims and added emotional testimony about his wife's stillborn child. implying that Willow's treatments had contributed to the tragedy. During cross-examination, Mr. Abernathy approached this sensitive topic with appropriate gravity but methodical precision. "Mr. Porter, did Doc Sullivan attend your wife during her difficult delivery?" "Yes, he did," Porter acknowledged. "And did he at any time suggest that Miss Winters' herbal preparations were harmful or contributed to the tragic outcome?" Porter hesitated. "Not directly, no. In fact, isn't it true that Doc Sullivan specifically stated that the child was in a breech position that would have been fatal regardless of intervention?" "He may have said something to that effect," Porter admitted reluctantly. "And yet you publicly supported the accusation that Miss Winters caused the death through dark arts. Why is that, Mr. Porter?" Unable to provide a convincing explanation, Porter's testimony ended on a note that further weakened the case against Willow. As the morning progressed, Judge Harmon's expression remained inscrutable, though he occasionally made notes and asked clarifying questions of the witnesses. By midday, Mr. Whittaker had presented all his witnesses, and the hearing moved to closing arguments. Mr. Whittaker went first, emphasizing the town council's authority to make decisions for the welfare of the community, and reiterating the claim that Willow had abandoned her property voluntarily. He downplayed the railroad connection as coincidental and portrayed Hollister as a forward-thinking leader preparing his town for inevitable progress. When Mr. Abernathy rose for his closing argument, his approach was measured but powerful. He systematically outlined the timeline of events, connecting the railroad survey directly to the sudden emergence of accusations against Willow. He highlighted the legal documentation proving her ownership of the property and the suspicious speed with which Hollister had moved to claim it. "Your Honor," he concluded, "this case represents a troubling abuse of power by those entrusted with civic leadership. Miss Winters has maintained her homestead honorably for 3 years since her father's passing, meeting all legal requirements of her claim. She was forced from her property through a campaign of intimidation and false accusations, precisely when that property became valuable due to anticipated railroad development. We ask the court to uphold her rightful ownership and issue an injunction preventing any transfer of the property to Mayor Hollister or any other party." Judge Harmon thanked both attorneys and announced he would consider the evidence and deliver his ruling after a brief recess. As the courtroom emptied, Willow and Ryker remained at their table, the tension of waiting almost more difficult to bear than the hearing itself had been. "You did everything possible," Ryker assured her, his hand covering hers where it rested on the table. "Mr. Abernathy presented our case perfectly." Willow nodded, unable to fully articulate the swirl of emotions inside her. After all that had happened, the decision now rested in the hands of a man who had no personal stake in the outcome, who would judge based on law and evidence rather than community pressures or personal vendettas. When Judge Harmon returned to the bench 30 minutes later, the courtroom had refilled with spectators eager to hear the outcome. The judge settled himself deliberately, arranging his papers before looking up to address the court. "Having considered the evidence and testimony presented in this matter, I am prepared to render my decision," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "The question before this court is whether Miss Willow Winters voluntarily abandoned her properly registered homestead claim, thereby forfeiting her rights to the property, or whether she was improperly forced from said property through coercion and false accusations." He paused, glancing down at his notes before continuing. "The evidence clearly establishes that Miss Winters has maintained continuous residence on her claim since inheriting it from her father 3 years ago. She has met all legal requirements, including payment of taxes and improvements to the property. The timing of the accusations against her, coming immediately after the railroad survey and resulting in her removal from the property, suggests strongly that these actions were motivated by interests other than community welfare. Willow felt Ryker's hand tighten around hers as hope began to rise within her. Furthermore, Judge Harmon continued, the immediate attempt by Mayor Hollister to claim the property as abandoned when Miss Winters had been gone less than a week demonstrates bad faith and improper procedure. The judge set his papers aside and looked directly at Willow. It is therefore the ruling of this court that Miss Winters' claim remains valid and in full effect. Mayor Hollister and the Redemption Creek Town Council are hereby ordered to cease all actions aimed at seizing her property and to facilitate her immediate return to her homestead. Additionally, the court orders that any personal possessions removed from Miss Winters' home be returned forthwith. A murmur ran through the courtroom as the judge continued. The court further notes with concern the pattern of behavior exhibited by Mayor Hollister and recommends that the Territorial Governor's Office review the proceedings of the Redemption Creek Town Council for possible violations of territorial statutes regarding abuse of authority. With a final tap of his gavel, Judge Harmon concluded the hearing. This matter is resolved in favor of the plaintiff. Court is adjourned. For a moment, Willow sat frozen in disbelief. Then the reality of the victory washed over her, bringing tears to her eyes. She turned to Ryker, who was smiling more broadly than she had ever seen. "We won," she whispered, the simple statement inadequate to express the tumult of emotions within her. "You won," he corrected gently, bringing her hand to his lips for a brief, tender kiss. "Your home is yours again." Mr. Abernathy approached, beaming with satisfaction. "Congratulations, Miss Winters. The judge's ruling was everything we could have hoped for and more. The referral to the governor's office means Hollister will face additional scrutiny that may prevent him from attempting similar tactics against others." After expressing their profound gratitude to the lawyer, Ryker and Willow left the courthouse, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight with lighter hearts than they had carried in days. News of the ruling had already spread to the street, where several onlookers offered congratulations. "What happens now?" Willow asked as they walked away from the courthouse. "Now we go home," Ryker replied simply. "Back to Redemption Creek, where you can reclaim your property with the full backing of territorial law." The word home resonated between them, carrying layers of meaning and possibility. As they walked, Willow considered what this victory meant: not just the return of her physical property, but the vindication of her character and the unexpected gift of finding someone who had stood beside her through the ordeal. "Ryker," she said, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk to face him directly. "When you say we go home, what do you see happening after that?" He looked down at her, his expression serious but tender. "That depends on what you want, Willow. Your land is yours again. You could return to living there as you did before." He paused, seeming to gather his courage before continuing. "Or, if you were of a mind to consider it, there might be other arrangements that would suit us both." "What kind of arrangements?" she asked, though the warmth in his eyes gave her a clear indication of his meaning. "The kind where a man and woman who have found something special might build a life together," he said quietly. "Where two homesteads that share a boundary line might become one larger operation, run by partners who value each other's strengths." Willow's heart quickened at his words. "Are you proposing an arrangement of convenience, Mr. Dawson? A practical merger of properties?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "There's nothing merely convenient about what I feel for you, Willow Winters. I'm proposing marriage if you'll have me. Not because it makes practical sense, though it does, but because these past days have shown me what kind of woman you are, and I find I don't want to imagine my future without you in it." They stood in the middle of Prescott's bustling Main Street, oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by as Willow absorbed his words. In the span of a week, she had lost her home, found an unexpected champion, battled for justice, and discovered a love she hadn't been looking for but now couldn't imagine living without. "Yes," she said simply, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "Yes, I'll marry you, Ryker Dawson." His face transformed with happiness as he pulled her into an embrace, propriety briefly forgotten as he sealed their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership and devotion. That evening, they celebrated their victory and engagement with a special dinner at Prescott's finest restaurant, joined by Mr. Abernathy and Mrs. Burke from the newspaper, who had taken a particular interest in their case. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from the details of the hearing to plans for their return to Redemption Creek and, more tentatively, ideas for their future together. "Will you continue to work with medicinal herbs once you're settled?" Mrs. Burke asked Willow over dessert. "I hope to," Willow replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps even more formally than before. During our time here, I visited the apothecary and learned that many of my remedies could be properly bottled and sold. There might be a business opportunity there, with the growing population in the territory. And the combined acreage of your properties would make for a substantial ranch," Mr. Abernathy noted, addressing Ryker. "Especially with the water access from both parcels." Ryker nodded, his hand finding Willow's beneath the table. "We've discussed raising horses primarily. Willow has a good eye for horseflesh, and there's always demand for well-trained mounts in the territory." As the evening concluded and they bid farewell to their new friends, Ryker and Willow walked slowly back to the boarding house, arm in arm beneath a sky ablaze with stars. "It feels strange," Willow mused. "A week ago I thought I had lost everything. Now I find I've gained more than I ever imagined possible." "Life has a way of surprising us," Ryker replied, drawing her closer against the evening chill. "When I rode into Redemption Creek 3 months ago, I was just looking for temporary work before settling on my claim. Wasn't expecting to find a partner for the journey ahead. When you rode up beside me that day and said I belonged with you, did you have any idea then what would happen between us?" Willow asked, curious about the moment that had changed both their lives. Ryker considered the question seriously. "Not specifically, no. I just knew I couldn't stand by and watch an injustice happen without doing something about it." He smiled down at her. "But I will admit, I'd noticed you around town before that. The way you carried yourself with quiet dignity despite the whispers. The kindness you showed to old Mrs. Mitchell when no one else would help her after her fall. You noticed all that?" Willow asked, surprised by his observations. "I notice things," he said simply. "Especially things worth noticing." At the boarding house, they reluctantly parted for the night, both aware of the propriety expected under Mrs. Harding's roof. Their journey home would begin the following morning, with plans to reach Ryker's homestead within 3 days, and then proceed to Redemption Creek to reclaim Willow's property with the court order in hand. The return journey felt entirely different from their trip to Prescott, where before they had been focused on the uncertain legal battle ahead. Now they rode with the confidence of victory and the shared anticipation of their future together. They talked more freely, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for what they might build together. On the second night of their journey, camped beside a small stream under a canopy of stars, Ryker surprised Willow by producing a small box from his saddlebag. Wanted to make it official, he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a small but brilliant sapphire. Belonged to my mother. One of the few things I kept after she passed. Always thought I'd give it to my wife someday if I was fortunate enough to find the right woman. Tears welled in Willow's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the deep blue stone catching the firelight with each movement of her hand. "It's beautiful," she whispered, overwhelmed by the gesture and the history behind it. "She would have liked you," Ryker said softly. "Strong, kind, not afraid to stand your ground when it matters." They sealed the moment with a kiss that began gently, but deepened with the acknowledgement of their growing desire for each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ryker rested his forehead against hers. 3 more weeks, he murmured. "Then you'll be Mrs. Dawson, and we won't have to say goodnight apart anymore." The thought sent a pleasant shiver through Willow. 3 weeks, she agreed, though I confess it feels like an eternity right now. He chuckled, pressing a final kiss to her forehead before moving back to his own bedroll across the fire. "Worth waiting for," he said simply. They reached Ryker's homestead on the afternoon of the 3rd day, greeted enthusiastically by Virgil, who had kept everything running smoothly in their absence. The old ranch hand's eyes widened when he noticed Willow's ring, then crinkled with pleasure as they shared their news. "About time," he declared, clapping Ryker on the shoulder. "Been watching you moon over her since you first saw her in town. Thought I might have to lock you two in the root cellar to get you to speak up." Ryker's embarrassed protest only confirmed Virgil's assessment, making Willow laugh with delight at this new insight into her fiancé's feelings. After a celebratory supper, they discussed their plan to ride into Redemption Creek the following morning with the court order. Virgil offered to accompany them for additional support, an offer they gratefully accepted. "Might be wise to have numbers on our side," Ryker acknowledged. "Hollister won't take this defeat graciously." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect late summer day for their confrontation in town. The 3 of them rode together, Willow between Ryker and Virgil, the court order safely stored in Ryker's saddlebag. As they approached Redemption Creek, Willow felt a strange mix of emotions: anxiety at facing the community that had cast her out, determination to reclaim what was rightfully hers, and a surprising sense of detachment. This place had been her home for a decade, yet in just a few short days, she had begun to see her future elsewhere in the home she would build with Ryker. The town appeared unchanged as they rode down the main street, though their arrival quickly drew attention. People emerged from shops and homes to watch their progress, conversations halting mid-sentence as recognition spread. Some faces showed surprise, others hostility, and a precious few, reflected relief and welcome. They rode directly to the sheriff's office, where they found both Sheriff Taylor and Mayor Hollister engaged in conversation. Both men looked up in shock as the 3 riders dismounted and entered the building. "This is a surprise," Hollister said coldly, recovering quickly from his initial reaction. "I thought you had taken the hint that you weren't welcome here anymore, Miss Winters." "That's where you're mistaken, Mayor," Willow replied with quiet confidence, nodding to Ryker, who produced the official document from his coat. "This is a court order from Judge Harmon of the Territorial Court," Ryker explained, handing the paper to Sheriff Taylor rather than Hollister. "It confirms Miss Winters' ownership of her property and instructs that she be allowed to return immediately, with all her possessions restored." The sheriff scanned the document, his expression carefully neutral. "This appears to be in order, Mayor." Hollister's face flushed with anger. "This is preposterous. The town council made its decision, and the territorial court has overruled it," Virgil interjected calmly. The law's the law, even in Redemption Creek. As Hollister continued to bluster, a small crowd gathered outside the sheriff's office, drawn by the commotion. Among them, Willow spotted Doc Sullivan and Jacob from the general store, both watching intently through the window. Furthermore, Ryker continued, addressing the sheriff directly, Judge Harmon has referred this matter to the territorial governor's office for review of possible abuse of authority. I suggest that Mayor Hollister and the council consider their next actions very carefully. The implied threat of higher scrutiny had its intended effect. Hollister's protests subsided, replaced by a calculating look that suggested he was reassessing his position. "Fine," he finally said. "The property remains yours, Miss Winters, but don't expect a warm welcome from this community. You've made your choice clear by challenging town authority." "Actually," Willow replied with newfound boldness, "I'll be Mrs. Dawson within the month. Mr. Dawson and I are to be married, and we'll be joining our properties into one operation." This announcement sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the gathered onlookers. Hollister's eyes narrowed as he reassessed the situation, clearly recognizing that the combined property would be even more substantial and more difficult to wrest away from its owners. "Congratulations," Sheriff Taylor offered, seemingly genuinely. "For what it's worth, I never did believe those accusations against you, Miss Winters. Got overruled by the council." Willow acknowledged his words with a nod, though she couldn't help noting he hadn't been brave enough to stand against the injustice when it mattered. With the official business concluded, they exited the sheriff's office to find the crowd had grown. Doc Sullivan pushed his way forward, grasping Willow's hand warmly. "Welcome back, my dear. You've been sorely missed, especially by my patients who prefer your remedies to my medicines." Jacob approached next, offering congratulations on both their engagement and their legal victory. "Your father would be proud," he told Willow. "He never backed down from a fight either." As more townspeople came forward, some to welcome Willow back, others simply curious about the developments, it became clear that the community was divided in its response. Some, like Hollister and his closest allies, remained hostile. Others seemed relieved that justice had prevailed, while many appeared simply willing to accept the territorial court's decision and move forward. By late afternoon, Willow had reclaimed her cabin with Ryker and Virgil's help. Though some smaller items had disappeared during her absence, the structure itself and most of her possessions remained intact. Walking through the familiar rooms, Willow felt a strange mixture of homecoming and farewell. This place held memories of her parents and her childhood, yet her future lay in creating a new home with Ryker. "What are you thinking?" Ryker asked softly, finding her standing in the doorway of her parents' old bedroom, lost in thought. "That endings and beginnings are often the same moment, viewed differently," she replied, turning to face him. "This was my sanctuary for so long. Now it feels like a stopping place on the way to somewhere else." He nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "We don't have to decide everything today. Take whatever time you need here." "No," Willow said with sudden clarity. "I know what I want. We'll maintain both properties, but our home will be the one we build together on your land, our land. This place can serve as a clinic, perhaps, where I can work with my herbs and healing." Ryker smiled, drawing her into his arms. "I like that plan, practical and forward-looking, just like you." The 3 weeks leading to their wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. News of their engagement spread throughout the area, eliciting a variety of responses. Some in Redemption Creek remained cold, influenced by Hollister's continued resentment, but many others embraced the couple's happiness and the opportunity it presented to heal the community's divisions. Preparations for the wedding brought Willow back into town regularly, as she ordered fabric for a new dress, arranged for the church service with the minister, and gradually re-established her place in the community. Each visit became easier as people adjusted to the new reality, and the more outrageous accusations faded into memory. Meanwhile, at Ryker's homestead, soon to be their shared home, they worked together to prepare for their married life. Willow added feminine touches to the cabin interior while maintaining its practical functionality. They expanded the garden, built additional shelving for her books and medicinal supplies, and began planning for future improvements that would accommodate their growing operation. Through it all, their bond deepened beyond the initial attraction and mutual respect that had drawn them together. They discovered complementary strengths and weaknesses, learned each other's habits and preferences, and found joy in building something together that neither could have created alone. The wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with the aspen trees glowing golden against the deep blue sky. The small church in Redemption Creek was filled with well-wishers: Doc Sullivan, Jacob and his family, several patients whom Willow had helped over the years, neighbors from surrounding homesteads, and even a few town council members who had quietly broken ranks with Hollister. Virgil stood as Ryker's best man, beaming with pride as he watched the quiet cowboy he had come to consider family take this momentous step. Mrs. Burke had traveled from Prescott to attend, along with Mr. Abernathy and several others who had supported their legal battle. As Willow walked down the aisle in her simple but elegant ivory dress, her eyes locked with Ryker's, and the certainty of their choice radiated between them. The minister's words washed over them promises of love, honor, and faithfulness that they had already begun to demonstrate through their actions. When Ryker slipped the gold band alongside his mother's sapphire ring on Willow's finger, his usually steady hands trembled slightly with the significance of the moment. And when they sealed their vows with a kiss, the church erupted in genuine applause and celebration. The reception that followed at the town hall represented a turning point for Redemption Creek itself. As the community gathered to celebrate the union, old grievances began to fade in the face of new beginnings. Music, dancing, and shared food created bonds that transcended the recent conflicts. Even Mayor Hollister made a brief appearance, offering stiffly formal congratulations before departing early. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the hall, Ryker drew Willow outside for a moment of quiet amid the festivities. In the cool autumn air, beneath a sky scattered with early stars, he held her close. "Happy Mrs. Dawson?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "Do you remember what you said that day when you rode up beside me as they cast me out? 'She belongs with me,'" he quoted softly. "Truer words were never spoken, though I didn't fully understand them at the time." "Nor did I," Willow admitted, "but I'm grateful every day that you said them." Their kiss beneath the stars sealed not just their wedding day, but the remarkable journey that had brought them together, a journey that had begun with injustice and hardship, but had led to love, partnership, and the promise of a future neither could have imagined alone. 5 years later, Willow stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Ryker taught their 3-year-old son, Walter, to sit astride his first pony. Their daughter, Emma, just 1 year old, babbled happily in her arms, reaching toward her father and brother with eager hands. The homestead had flourished under their joint care. The horse breeding operation had gained a reputation throughout the territory for quality stock, while Willow's medicinal practice had grown into a respected business, with patients traveling considerable distances to seek her remedies. Her clinic, established in her former cabin, now employed 2 apprentices who were learning the healing arts under her guidance. Redemption Creek itself had changed as well. The railroad had indeed come through, bringing growth and prosperity, though not precisely as Hollister had envisioned. His influence had waned following the territorial governor's investigation, and the next election had seen him replaced by a more progressive mayor who recognized the value of working with all members of the community, including the independent-minded Dawsons. As Ryker lifted Walter down from the pony and turned toward the house, his face lighting with the smile he reserved for his family, Willow reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. The injustice that had once threatened to destroy her life had instead led her to a happiness far greater than she had ever dared to imagine. Ryker bounded up the porch steps, Walter perched on his shoulders and shrieking with delight. Leaning in to kiss Willow, he then took Emma into his free arm, balancing both children with practiced ease. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Just how far we've come," she replied, linking her arm through his as they entered their home together. "And how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones if you're brave enough to keep going." Ryker nodded, understanding as he always did the deeper currents of her thoughts. "And if you're fortunate enough to find someone to ride beside you along the way," he added softly. As the door closed behind them, enclosing their family in the warmth and security of the home they had built together, Willow knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, and had been from the moment a quiet cowboy had ridden up beside her and changed her life forever.